Hello and welcome to the Living Life Differently podcast. I'm your host, Ali Mahoney, and I interview women from across the world who've made big, bold changes in life. In this episode, I speak with Emily Chappell, who, when looking for a job in busy London, made a decision that completely changed her life. Enjoy! So, welcome to the podcast, Emily Chappell. Great to have you here today.
Great to be here.
Brilliant. I wonder if you could give listeners a bit of a quick summary of where you are now in life, where you're living, what you do for a living, um, what your keen interests are, before we go back to a really pivotal moment in your life.
Great. Well, I always say when people ask me what I do for a living, it's more of a paragraph than just a job title because there's quite a few different things. But I guess the headline is I make a living somehow out of having adventures on my bike and talking about them. So I do a bit of writing, a bit of journalism. I've written a couple of books. I do various stuff on social media. I also occasionally lead and guide bike rides. I give talks, and I think that's more or less it. But yeah, and anything that involves being out on the bike and telling other people about it is sort of what my career is based around. And I'm sort of amazed that I've ended up with this career because it's very nearly 20 years since I got into cycling. So it's been a long time. It doesn't feel like that. Obviously, it feels like it's been about 2 years. And all the things I'm doing now didn't really exist when I started out. When I was growing up, none of these careers were really a thing. And when I got into cycling and I was this sort of idiot newbie for quite a while, not only could I not imagine I would make a living out of it, but none of the jobs I'm doing existed. I couldn't have foreseen the career it's turned into and the great life I have now. I still think, yeah, this is gonna run out eventually. My luck will run out, but it's been a long time now and it seems to still have some momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've touched on something really important there, that the world is really different now, isn't it, in terms of the way jobs are, the way that life is, the way that people can make a living. And it's brilliant to hear that your living is made from what you enjoy the most, which is cycling. And I can't wait to get stuck into some of the cycle adventures you've had in recent years. But I'd love to go back. I know you mentioned being an author, so I'm gonna do this straight away. So here are two fantastic books of yours which
Yeah,
I have on my bookshelf. And I've read What Goes Around. And I think that's been out quite a while now, hasn't it?
yeah, that's actually getting on for 10 years.
Is it really? Happy anniversary. And I've also got a copy of Where There's a Will, which I haven't got around to yet because I'm a terrible reader. I love reading, but time is just an issue. But I can't wait to get stuck into that. And I thought a good way to go back to your early years and look at how you got into cycling originally was if I just turn the cover of What Goes Around. It says at 25, Emily Chappell thought she'd eventually earn her living as an academic. She took up cycle couriering while she searched for a real job. So let's go back, shall we, to a couple of periods in your life. So how was life meant to go for you? Let's go back to kind of school. Did you go to college? What was your kind of path early on?
I always thought I was going to be something involving books. I didn't really have the courage to believe I would write them, although I dreamed of that. As a child, one of my first jobs was in a bookshop. I dreamed that one day my books would be in that shop. And I always wanted to be an author, but also I didn't have much confidence in myself. I didn't really think that would happen. So I did my best in school. I was always very good in school. I was very brainy and worked quite hard and didn't have many friends. So that went well. And I went to Cambridge. To my surprise, I got in and wasn't very good at the start, but by the end I'd figured it out. So I got quite a good mark. And I thought, yeah, this seems to be the thing for me. I love studying and reading and being in the library and writing essays. And perhaps I'll carry on with this and I'll become an academic like all the people I have learned to idolize here at Cambridge. And that was what I planned to do. I was going to go on and do a master's and do a PhD. I wanted to be Dr. Emily, and I'd write very learned books that very few people would read, and hopefully get a job teaching somewhere. And that was what I hoped would happen. I never really believe I'm going to achieve my dreams, so I wasn't sure, but I hoped. And I continued with this plan. I managed to get funding for a master's program in London, and at the end of that, I failed to get funding for my PhD and thought, okay, well, that sucks, but let's take a year or two out, get a job, and keep applying. And so I looked for jobs, and I'd done a bit of work in finance a couple of years previously. I hadn't been very good at it or liked it very much, but I thought if I can get a job in finance, that's at least money. So let's try that. So I started looking for jobs in finance, I don't know anything about finance, but I could edit. So I would edit documents. This was the latter half of 2008. And as you might remember, there was a huge global financial crash
Mm.
just gathering force at that point. So there were no jobs in finance. That plan did not work out. And I looked around for various other things. And the only job I managed to get at that point was being a cycle courier. And I mean, in some ways, it did feel like a bit of a failure because here I was, I've just finished my second degree at prestigious institutions,
Yeah.
and all I can get is this kind of brainless manual labor job. But also, I got into cycling over the last couple of years, and I'd got more and more obsessed with it. And obviously, if you cycle in London, you start to idolize cycle couriers because they are just the epitome of urban cool. And I used to ride around sometimes, like sneakily following them through gaps, looking at them, failing to start up conversations. Of course, I wanted to be one. So I was also quite pleased that I had the chance to try this. And I didn't really think it was going to be, a career or anything. I just thought, oh, I'll do it for, a couple of months maybe. Eventually, I'll find another job, and eventually, I'll get funding and I'll get back into academia. And this will just be a story I get to tell at dinner parties many years hence.
So, in terms of, looking for a job, how did cycle careering come about in terms of, I guess in London, although there's the big crisis and not many jobs in the jobs market, I think if I was in your situation, I don't think cycle careering would come straight to mind. Was it because you had a love of cycling already? Had you ridden bikes a lot when you were younger? How did it come about? Because it's quite a pivotal change, isn't it? It's not your everyday job.
Yeah. And I think of all the big changes in my life, this is probably the most important. This is the one that set me on my path. So, yeah, I hadn't been an athletic child. I'd done a bit here and there, like most kids have bikes. Sometimes I was into it, sometimes I wasn't. You wouldn't have looked at me and thought, oh, she's the one who's going to go on to do great things. Um, and yeah, when I was at university, I was almost sedentary. I just didn't really exercise at all. I was not sporty. And it was when I first moved to London. So after Cambridge, again, I had another period of moving to London and trying to find jobs and failing. It's really
Yeah.
a bit of a theme. Put me off applying for jobs. And I had a miserable time for like 9 months in London, just barely getting any jobs. And when I did, they were temp jobs or, rubbish bar work. Um, and sometime during that period, I realized that public transport was sucking me dry, and I'd seen people riding bikes. And again, it was something I was terrified. I was like, how can you even ride a bike in a city? That just seems impossible. And also, ooh, that looks really great. I want to have a go. So somehow I got into it. I bought a bike off Gumtree and was terrified. Kept it in my room and hung pants on it for quite a while. Eventually went out. Eventually, a couple of successive girlfriends sort of showed me the ropes. And very quickly, I got obsessed and started doing big long rides. And I think because I had been so lost and so lonely when I moved to the city, this was the thing that helped me find my feet, and it helped me make friends, and it helped me learn my way around the city, and it helped me just feel confident in myself and like I could do something. So that was, I think, early 2006, and almost immediately riding a bike became part of my identity. So then skip forward 2 years to when I've getting again, finished a degree, failed to find a job. I was, I still felt like a novice. It had been 2 years, um, barely any time, and I hadn't been cycling even for all of that time. But I loved it. I wanted to do it more and more. I'd spent the summer that I was meant to be writing my master's thesis basically skiving off and going out on my bike all the time. So it felt like a natural continuation. And then, of course, I started working as a courier and realized that it was so much harder than just riding all day out in the country. And I couldn't believe it because I thought I'm fit. I've been doing 80, 100-mile rides all summer. But it's different when you're riding around London because you're constantly stopping and starting, and you stop and then you sprint and then you stop at the lights and then you sprint again and then you stop and you calm down and you have a rest and then you get back on the bike and you sprint again. And I was knackered for weeks, probably even months.
I guess starting out must have been a big shock for you mentally and physically. But did you find that you quickly kind of found your cycling legs over the weeks and months that you gave more time to it?
Yeah, I did. I did. I think it's probably the first couple of months. I really was just hanging on. I was more physically exhausted than I'd ever been, and I would fall asleep at 9 o'clock every night. And a lot of my friends, I remember during that period, were like, "You've just disappeared. Like, are you okay? Where are you? I heard this rumor that you're working as a courier." And then eventually, I think I got used to it. So the first few weeks were awful, and then by spring, I think of the second year I rode into, I just went back to normal and, would stay up till 1 a.m. messing around and think, oh God, I really should get more sleep. And then get up at 7 and start riding, and it was fine. Um, and yeah, getting through the first winter was a big deal. I mean, if you've
Yeah.
read, you might remember I met an old Yorkshireman sitting on a park bench who was also a courier, and he gave me some expertise and told me some stories. And at one point he said, "Yeah, you're not a real courier till you've done your first winter. That's what they say." And I thought, right, that's what I'm going to do then. That's my first challenge. So I think it was like late October, early November, and I thought, right, I've got to get through November, December, January, February, and then I'm allowed to say I'm a courier.
Then you've got the badge of honor. You've done
Yeah.
it.
I
You've
mean,
got
no
the
one else
t-shirt.
cared. It was
Yeah,
just a hoop I set for myself to jump through. But
absolutely brilliant. Remind me, what did you study? What was your academic discipline?
so my first degree was in English, and then my second degree officially was in gender studies. I did it at SOAS in London, which is the School of Oriental and African Studies. So it was gender studies, but with quite a lot of South Asian literature as part of that, as the options I chose, because my plan was to go on and do a PhD in something really, really like important, like feminist voices in modern Urdu Pakistani poetry or something like that. And I honestly can't even remember now what my plan was, but it was something like that I was interested in and I was
Yeah.
quite fascinated by, but no one else was going to be. It was not going to meaningfully contribute to the world as we know it.
So you're on that academic pathway, and then you're finding work, and you end up on the bike, basically. What's what are your family and friends thinking at this time? Were they shocked, surprised, supportive, a mixture? How did that land?
It was a mixture. It was a mixture. I think the most fun one was my dad, who well, I think at first I remember him saying, "You've become what? A what? So you're just going to do that for the rest of your life then?" Because I think part of him, he wants his kids to be secure and to, know that they're going to have a job that will look after them and all of that. But there's a side of him as well that is quite adventurous and possibly wishes he'd had more adventures himself. And round about that time, he was retiring. And I can't remember if he was in London for work or something, or he just came down to see me. But he came and spent a morning on the road with me and just rode around behind me on his bike, watching me do my job. At one point, I actually sent him into a building to get a package signed for, and he came out and was like, "Oh my God, that's an office. I know what that's like. I've worked in offices, and here I am, I'm a cycle courier." And after that, he just couldn't get enough of it. I remember overhearing him telling his friends about his daughter's amazing job and how cool it was and how thrilling it was riding through the city. So there was a bit of that. A lot of my friends thought it was really cool.
Mhm.
I think some of them felt sorry for me because, they'd got PhD funding and I hadn't. And then there's always a few people, it was less often my friends, but still sometimes, who'd say, yeah, why do cycle couriers always jump the lights? Like, people say, well, actually, some do, many don't, and here's my explanation. And they just say, why do they always jump the lights though? One of them nearly hit me once, and I hated that conversation because it was, I could try and explain the nuances of the situation, but no one ever really wanted to listen.
Yeah,
They just wanted to, you know, vent their anger or whatever it was. So that, yeah, it was a mixed bag.
yeah. And then I've had experience of cycling in London. So I lived there for a couple of years and I started cycling to work. And wow, what a place. I mean, this was a while ago. I mean, we're talking like early 2000s. And it's not for the faint-hearted, is it, cycling in London? And especially the job you were doing. There's a need to go at pace to get the job done and, spend all day on the road. How did you keep yourself safe? Yeah. What was it like?
Well, I think it's a bit of a misconception that we were meant to ride fast.
Okay.
Everybody always says that about couriers. You've got deadlines, you've got to speed, you've got to jump the lights or you lose your job, and it's absolutely not true. Like if you're riding at a reasonable pace, you'll always get the delivery there really quickly. Like most places in London, if you know where you're going, you know the way, and you're a reasonably proficient cyclist, you can get there in 10, 15 minutes. And that was always quicker than the client would expect.
Mm.
I think I mean, I can remember one occasion, there were probably two or three occasions in my entire career where it actually was urgent. Like at one point, I can't remember, it was something like delivering tickets to a guy who was about to get in a taxi to be rushed to the airport or something like that. Like it really was
Yeah.
cutting fine. And on that occasion, I really did go for it. And I almost always stuck to the rules of the road, on principle, like militantly. And on this occasion, I thought, no, 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 I'm going to have to carefully really go for it. I think I jumped a couple of lights. And I remember he was waiting outside the building. The taxi was there. I got there and he was like, thank God. And then went. But that was the only time in like 6 years. So most of the time you're riding at the speed you go. And it is fairly fast because you do this job, you get quite fit, you get used to riding through traffic and dealing with all the stuff that happens because as you know in London there's loads going on, there's loads of different streams of traffic, so many different drivers, many of whom don't really know what they're doing, so they might suddenly turn right without really planning it. Also loads of pedestrians, they're actually the worst because they have no rules and no discipline. They just do what they want. They don't indicate. They don't, So that was that. And yeah, there's pigeons, there's potholes, there's drain covers, there's turnings you didn't know were there. So you're always looking with your whole eyeballs, you're looking ahead of you at where you're going, you're looking at everything in your peripheral vision, you're looking as far ahead as you can and trying to make judgments about that person walking down the pavement there. Are they suddenly going to step out into the road? That car there, are they going to suddenly stop? Are they going to change direction? Once that car has come past there, is that car then going to do something? So you're reading, it's like playing chess,
Mm.
which I'm not very good at. You're reading all these possible different situations into the future. And then every millisecond, something will change. And then you realize, okay, well, that car's not going to do that now because it can't, because that car's in its way. But what about the situation that's opening up there? So that's what's happening in your
Yeah.
head. So I
What?
never really thought about it in terms of, I'm going really fast.
Yeah.
So I was going reasonably fast. It's more you're constantly navigating this extremely complex, evolving situation. And it's really rewarding just riding around doing that all day and mostly getting quite good at it because you do something enough, you get good at it. It was really satisfying. And in all the years I was doing this job, I never got bored of it. I thought I would because it's not a very complicated job, but it was really, really interesting all the time.
So, as you've got into it and you've developed and you've progressed and you've started to really enjoy it, then what's happening in your mind in terms of your future plans? Are you still thinking, I'm after still after PhD funding, or are you still looking for an academic job, or has your mindset shifted into a different place in terms of your future life goals?
It did, yeah. And it took me, actually, it was almost 2 years before I really noticed that had happened because I still was hoping to go and do a PhD. And at one point, I was looking at programs in New York. I remember I went out there and, um, paid some visits, sat in on some seminars. And that was the plan. But also, it had just turned into something that I was not getting round to. And I knew I needed to, sit down and do some research and write some proposals and, put together some applications and figure out what my deadlines were. And it was hanging over me. You know how it is. It was just really, it was a weight on my mind. And I was feeling terrible for myself for not doing this and sabotaging myself. And then at one point, it was early 2010, I think. I just experimentally thought, well, let's just give up on it for a year. Let's just tell myself I've given up on the idea. And obviously, I can change my mind at any point. So, if I give up on the idea, maybe eventually I will, my enthusiasm will come back and I can go and do it again. And it was when I gave up on the idea that I realized, oh, the idea has been dead on the vine for a really long time. It just kind of crumbled away. It wasn't what I wanted to do anymore. And that was kind of exhilarating, but also I didn't know what I was going to do. So I had this, the summer of 2010, it was great because all I was doing was being a cycle courier and having fun. So I had no obligations anymore outside work that I placed on myself. I was just riding around in the city streets, having a great time, feeling cool. Because I was two years in. I really knew what I was doing. And I was partying and just reading whatever books I wanted to read. But at the same time, at the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, you can't just do this forever, though. You really can't. Like, what are you going to do? What's your plan? What's your career? What's your goal? And I'd never not had some sort of big goal because I'm quite an ambitious person. And so I was enjoying my freedom. But I was also, yeah, just thinking I can't not have a goal. And I cycled through all sorts of things. I thought I could become a firefighter. Maybe I'll do that. And I looked into that. Maybe I could go and train and become a doctor. I'd often thought about that. Maybe I should do that. It's quite a lot of work. I don't know. And I think there were other things as well. And then at the end of that summer, a few things happened. I read a couple of books that sort of started to give me ideas. And I mean, the way I remember it happening, there were a couple of things. One day I was riding up Park Lane, which is, it's at the edge of Hyde Park. It's a huge, like 3 or 4 lanes going each way. And I was having to get all the way across it to turn right. So I was kind of throwing myself across the lanes in and out of the traffic. And it's always a bit risky, but I knew what I was doing. And at one point I had a what he considered a narrow miss with a van. And so the guy sounded his horn and I carried on riding and he drew alongside me and I braced myself because I thought, oh, he's gonna, swear at me. I've been called everything under the sun. Fine, water off a duck's back, but he didn't. He just looked out the window at me and said, there's no repeat button on life, you know. You don't
Ooh.
get it back. Once it's gone, it's gone. And drove off. And that just sort of, it didn't literally stop me in my tracks, but I thought about it for the rest of the day. And then sometime quite close to that, maybe even the same day, I was riding home and I stopped in Brixton Cycles because there was something wrong with my bike. And I walked into the bike shop. I was there every week or so because there was always something wrong with my bike. So I was moaning about my stupid bike breaking again. And whoever was behind the counter said, well, yes, Emily, but you do quite a lot of cycling. Of course, your bike's going to break all the time. What do you do, like 300 miles a week? And so I fixed the bike. And on the way home, I was thinking, yeah, I do quite a lot of miles, don't I? I'd never really thought about it. I'd never measured it. And people had said, yeah, you probably do about 60 miles a day. So, okay, 300 miles a week. And I tried to work out what have I done as a courier?
Yeah.
And my maths is not very good. So I didn't really get to a conclusion. But I thought, yeah, it's going to be a really big number, isn't it? It's going to be, I don't know, like how many times around the world. And that was when I had the idea. And like this light bulb came on in my head. And I thought, oh God, that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to cycle around the world.
How cool to be able to come to that decision. I guess it's kind of like sliding doors moments, isn't it? You know, the guy in the van just kind of stopping you in the tracks a bit, thinking about, a little bit about mortality, but also maybe about, right, sharpen my mind a bit, what am I going to do? And yeah, the statistics of the miles that you're doing. So cycling around the world, not everybody decides to do that. What happened next?
What happened next was that I very quickly made a plan to cycle around the world. And what people said was, you need to make a plan and set a date and tell everyone. So then you have to do it. So I did that almost immediately. And I set the date as far into the future as I could get without it being so far that it was not going to happen. So I think the date I set was the 1st of September 2011. And then I absolutely freaked out because it had become a thing already. Everyone was talking about it, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, that's amazing!" And I was like, "Yeah, but I haven't done it yet, and I don't know what I'm doing. All I've done is say I'm going to do this thing, and there's so much stuff I have to figure out." And you don't know where to start. And it's also one of those things where there's not a manual. So even when you've started and you've done loads of stuff, you don't know if there's an important thing you're forgetting, and you don't know if you've done enough, and you don't know if you've finished. So the year that followed was so stressful. And in hindsight, I was fine. I was over preparing and over planning and overthinking everything, but I didn't know at the time. So, yeah, I decided to build a bike from scratch because I thought, well, that way I will know how to fix it when it goes wrong. And I made the mistake of asking all the bike mechanics I knew for their advice on, what sort of bottom bracket, what sort of brakes, what sort of headset. And of course, that meant I got like 8 different answers.
Right.
Um, so I was none the wiser. So every single component was this really stressful decision where at least half the people I asked said I was making it wrong. And that was one thing. And then planning a route.
Mm.
And when I thought about it, cycling around the world through all these interesting countries sounded like a great idea. But when I started to get down into the details, I was like, well, how do you know where to go? How do you know how to get there? How do you know which countries are safe and which borders you cross? And what do you need to know about crossing a border? How do I find that out? And all of this. What's a visa? How do I get one? How do I know which ones I need? How do I sort that out? And again, there was no checklist, there was no manual telling me any of this. I had to just find as many sources as I could and hope I had got all the information and not missed anything important.
Yeah. And I guess nowadays there's a lot of information on the internet, isn't there, from people like yourselves that have done it or done parts of it or traveled in weird and wonderful different countries that you can reach out to and ask or watch their vlogs, read their blogs, etc. So I'm guessing back then there wasn't really that information at your fingertips, was there? Or did you know of people in the cycling community that you could lean on for support?
Well, one of the first things I did when I kind of made my announcement and set my date, someone had told me about an event at the Royal Geographical Society called Explore, which I think still runs every year. And it's a sort of big, it's either one day or 2 days. It's like a weekend conference. And people who want to do adventurous trips of all sorts, mountaineering, crossing oceans, gathering scientific samples in jungles, all of that can come. And there's workshops and there's lectures and there's mingling and all sorts of things. And you can speak to experts. And one of the main things that got me started was there was a workshop in the afternoon on one of the days for people who wanted to do long bike trips. And I came away from that just with a huge long list of stuff. And I'd met a few people who'd done things like that. And although I was still incredibly daunted, one of the things I realized in that session was I'm not actually a beginner because I felt like it. I always felt stupid, but I had actually spent the last few years working as a cycle courier. So there were a lot of things I didn't have, but I did have fitness. I did have some knowledge of how bicycles work. And I realized only afterwards, once I got started, I also had the ability to deal with stuff. Because when you're a cycle courier, you're on your own,
Yeah,
you're working on your own. If anything comes up, you've just got to sort it out. You've got to get the package from here to here. And if the road's closed, you've got to find a way around. And if something happens to your bike, you've got to, fix it or something, deal with that. If you have an altercation with a cabbie, you've got to assert yourself. If you have a crash with a pedestrian, all of this stuff. And no one helps you with it. You have to deal with it on your own. So I realized I was not actually a beginner, even though I felt like it, and even though I was in some aspects of what I was planning to do.
so did that then give you some confidence to carry on with planning to get yourself to the start line and the start date?
Yeah, I think all the way through it, I had in my head both things. I had this feeling of I'm totally out of my depth. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm scared I'm going to get it wrong and sabotage the whole thing before I even start. I'm scared it might go wrong and I'm scared of everything. How am I going to speak to people in foreign countries when I don't really speak very many languages? And on the other hand, there was a voice in my head that was like, no, this is what you want to do and you can do it. Like, you're a better cyclist than some people.
Yeah.
You're better at fixing bikes than some people, not many. And you can do this. And there was some confidence there. And I think had I not been a cycle courier, I wouldn't have had that. I probably wouldn't have had the guts to get going and do it.
Sure. And then in the lead up to this, then Emily, were you saving up some money and did you have a plan for how long you were going to be away for and potentially how much that might cost so you could kind of exit your everyday life to go and do this fantastic adventure?
So yeah, the money was I'm glad you asked about the money because I think it's always very important to say how you manage to make these things happen. Like it's not
Mm,
like I just had a fortune floating around somewhere. That I got the money for it from I think a year or so before I even had the idea. I'd had actually a very minor crash. It was late at night. I was riding home and pulling away from the lights. A driver didn't see me and just sort of drove into me from the side. And I'd had loads of minor and slightly less minor crashes. So this was not really a big one by my standards.
mm.
But I cut my chin open. And the driver was a very nice man who was utterly freaked out when he saw this cyclist on the ground covered in blood. I didn't even realize till I got home. So I was kind of quite chill and he was he was really alarmed. So he gave me his details. And a day or two later, I went to the hospital to get sewn up, and the doctor said, "Oh, you should do one of those no win, no fee things." It just hadn't even occurred to me, but I had the driver's details, so I did.
Yeah.
And long story short, I got £7,000,
Wow.
which was, yeah, I don't know if that happens anymore. And a couple of people told me at the time, apparently, if you are a young woman, you get a bigger payout for facial injuries because, never mind the husband now. So so that was kind of the bedrock of my funds. And then also a year or so before I set off, I just started working as much as I could. So I was working 7 days a week. I was doing the couriering.
Yeah.
I was also doing quite a lot of editing and copywriting, which was better paid, and just like saving up as hard as I could. And in hindsight, no wonder I was stressed that year because I really was burning the candle at all possible ends. I was working all the time. I was socializing as much as I could because I was going to miss my friends. I
Yeah.
was trying to build a bike, plan a route, figure out visas, and also give away and sell all my stuff. So, God, it was exhausting. No wonder I was stressed out.
So getting to the start line then, was that kind of a relief in some way when you did set off and I guess all that stress and, the drama of setting this up kind of slipped away and you could just be yourself on the bike traveling. Did you travel east to begin with?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
What was that like?
it really did just dissolve. Like the
Yeah.
first morning, I left from the house where I grew up in mid Wales, and it was great. Left at 6 a.m., 1st of September, and just riding down the road, with the smell of autumn in the air. And I was like, yeah, it's just me riding a bike. That's all it is. And then the stress did ramp up again as I left the country because the first couple of weeks I was just riding through the UK, hanging out with friends, having leaving drinks. Lovely. And then I got on the ferry to France and I had this terrible, terrible dip where I was sitting on the ferry and it was a short crossing. I was, 90 minutes or something. Excuse me. So yeah, I was on the ferry, just not wanting to get off the ferry, just thinking, oh God, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I can't bear it. I was dreading the ferry docking. I wanted to find an excuse to just stay on it and go back to the UK because I mean, it was an irrational fear. I can't explain what it was that scared me so much, but I was dreading it when I had to roll away from the sanctuary of that ferry and then just like, here's the world, off you go, cycle round it. And it was all very well to say when I was planning, but the practicalities of I'm going to be riding through a strange country with nowhere to go, nowhere safe, no home to go to, no sanctuary, no person I can go to look after me. And I was planning to wild camp. And again, that had been very easy to say, and I knew that was what people did. But the reality of looking for somewhere to camp in Belgium, which is all built up. And I just thought, but I can't. What if someone sees me? What if someone finds me? What if I get arrested? What if I get murdered? I don't know. It was terrifying. And yeah, that didn't last long, but that was the worst bit of the trip, I think, the first 24 hours into Europe.
Yeah, I can just imagine that kind of fear and trepidation, the absolute uncertainty of everything that's unknown. I guess the cycling is the easy bit, isn't it? Because you can do that day to day, but then it's where do you sleep? What do you eat? Where can I put my tent? Who's around me and how can I keep safe? There are lots of different questions there, but I guess, what I'm hearing is you quickly settled into it and carried on. And I think I'd love to talk for a long time about a round the world trip, but we're going to struggle to squish it all in. But could you give us um, a kind of a synopsis of how it went and what you learned along the way, how things developed?
Well, I mean, the real synopsis is it went really well. Within days, I worked out that there's just nothing to be scared of with bike touring. It's embarrassingly easy. So all my friends were still talking about what a hero I was back at home. And I was like, oh God, I feel like a fraud. Seriously, it's so much easier than being at home. I just wake up, eat some Nutella, like get on my bike, have lunch, find somewhere to sleep. And finding somewhere to sleep was never, ever a problem. Literally, in 18 months, I didn't ever have a problem finding somewhere to sleep. I could camp pretty much anywhere. No one ever made a fuss. Usually, they didn't know I was there, but if anyone did, they'd just be like, fine, cool, crack on. I often met friendly people who invited me to stay in their houses, and they were always lovely, and wonderfully generous and kind. Sometimes I stayed in cheap hostels or, as I got further east, cheap hotels, and that was also nice. And yeah, it was always fine. It was really comfortable. And that was the biggest surprise because before I'd left, I had just assumed that it would always be scary. You're going into the unknown. Of course it's scary. And it just wasn't. Like now when I think about going off on a bike tour, I think, oh yeah, that's my happy place.
Yeah.
Gonna be fine. At the start of a continent with a bike and bags and not knowing where I'm sleeping that night, that's my safe place. So
And
that
what was your route? Which countries did you end up traveling through?
so I crossed Europe, went down through the Balkans, which I loved. And I want to tell you stories about all of these, but we are gonna have to cut it a bit shorter. I crossed Turkey, in winter, which was very, very cold indeed. I think at times it was minus 25, and I was not unprepared, but ill prepared, shall we say. Then I crossed into Iran. It's also very cold the whole way through Iran. But I'm glad I went there in winter rather than summer. And Iran was a wonderful place to cycle. I think it's not possible these days, but I had a really good time. Um, Crossed into Pakistan and rode north through Pakistan, um, over the Karakoram Highway into China. I crossed China. Took me a very long time, because China is huge. I mean, I knew it was huge, but I just didn't really know how huge it was until I tried to cross it by bike. It's really, really, really big. And from there, I took a ferry to South Korea. I rode the width and length of South Korea, and that was a great place to cycle. And from there, I crossed to Japan. Rode almost all the islands of Japan except Hokkaido, the northern one, which I missed out on, and I really wish I could go there. So one day I'll have to go back. And that was it. That was as far around the world as I got. Because by the time I got to Japan, I'd been away from home for 18 months
Yeah.
and I was tired and becoming quite depressed. And I'd realized that my brain was not taking things in as joyfully as it had been at the start. I
Mm.
think it was even when I got into Korea, I started noticing that I was feeling really bored by this new culture I was encountering and thought that that can't be Korean culture. That's my fault. That's because my brain is just fed up with taking on board new cultures and it's trying to get me to stop. So I went home from Japan and yeah, that was, and I thought, oh, I'll carry on riding around the world in installments, but I keep getting distracted by other trips. I haven't got very far with that.
I mean, I think what I'll do is put some links into some other podcasts that I've listened to, and obviously the links to your books as well, because I think as a spin off to this, I would love people to delve into that round the world adventure in more detail and hear more about the experience that you had. So I'll definitely do that. In terms of getting home, then, how did life change again for you? Because that must have been another pivotal moment in your life, doing something that epic. I'm guessing you just didn't go back to what you were doing, and I know for certain you didn't stay cycle couriering for the rest of your life. So how did life change? What happened next?
Well, slowly. So I did actually go back to what I was doing, and I had quite a hard time the first sort of 9 months, 12 months that I was back because I had assumed I would change completely as a person. And also that, home would change and everything would be different. And I went back and I got another job as a cycle courier and I did that for another year. And I think I was very happy in some ways to do that. And it was a job that was good for me and it kept me together a bit when I was quite miserable and I loved it. But there was also a bit of disappointment of, oh, well, I thought everything would be different and I'd be this new wonderful person and yet here I am. And then I think it was around about that was that year. People had started reading the blogs that I wrote about my adventures and whatnot, and I had various publishers and literary agents get in touch and say, "Oh, we think you could write a book about some of this." And the one I went with said, "No, no, no, don't write a book about cycling around the world. There's loads of them." And I agreed with her. She said, "I think you should write a book about being a cycle courier. I think that's the more interesting story." And so I did. So that became the next project. And then alongside that, I started going and doing other things. So I'd wanted to continue my round the world trip and ride through North America. And because I felt I knew what I was doing with bike touring by then, I thought, well, let's up the ante a bit and do it in winter because they get really good winters there. And I wanted to, I mean, I had enjoyed my time in Eastern Turkey, even though it was horrible. Enjoy is perhaps not. It was very type two, and I wanted to try and do it a bit better. So I did a couple of winter trips. I did a dress rehearsal in Iceland one year. I crossed Iceland in winter, and that was fun on a fat bike. And then the following year, I went and rode from Anchorage to Seattle in the depths of winter. So camping at -40, frostbite on my ears, icicles on my eyelashes, all that sort of thing. And then and this is the subject of the second book, in amongst all of these adventures, I started to notice that someone had set up a race across Europe. And it was a race unlike any I'd ever heard of because it was just non-stop, self-supported across Europe. And people were riding, 300, 400 kilometers a day and barely sleeping. And I tried to pretend to myself that I was not interested in this. And that didn't last very long. And then well, it was the end of 2014, I met some people who'd done this race and they talked me into entering. And I had exactly the same thing as with cycling around the world, this simultaneously thinking, oh, I really want to do this and I kind of think I can. And also feeling so out of my depth and so clueless and such an idiot. And what am I even thinking trying to do this thing?
It's funny to hear you say that, isn't it? In terms of your cycling accomplishments up to that point. You've cycled all the way across to Japan, you've done North America, you cycle careering X hundred miles a week, but then there's still that self-doubt. Do you think that's something that's always been there or always will be there? Is it, what do you think?
I think yes. I think yes, basically. It always has. And although I work hard on it, I'm sure it always will in some shape or form. It moves around. As soon as you realize you can do something, you're like, fine, I can do that. But where's something I can't do? Let's focus on that. And I mean, it can be a force for good, with all of these challenges I took on. I was always a bit too wrapped up in the ways in which I couldn't do it and was likely to fail. But that meant I focused on them and tried to improve them and gained skills and got better at things. Turned out in the end, I was very, very good at racing across continents. Um, and that was partly because I actually had a lot of the skills from the stuff I'd done before, and partly because I worked really hard on trying to fill in the gaps where I didn't have the skills. Um, but I think, I mean, nowadays, particularly, it can also stand in my way because there's things I want to do and I think, oh no, 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 but I won't be any good at it and it'll be embarrassing if people see me try and fail. So I'll just stay away from that, which I think can stop me from doing things that I could do and should do and would love doing. So yeah, it's just one of those things. It's like trying to put on a fitted sheet that's a little bit too small for the bed. And every time you get three corners nicely tucked in, the other one pops up.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. So, transcontinental race, could you give people a quick overview of what it involves? You've talked about it being self-supported, but there's a bit more to it, isn't there, in terms of checkpoints, timings, etc., and also a bit about your accomplishments. Because I, am I right in thinking the first one didn't quite go to plan, but the next one was amazing?
Basically, yes. So yeah, the race it was founded in 2013. So when I got into it, it was still a discipline very much in its infancy. And there had been one or two similar races in the past. Well, there's a race called the Tour Divide, which a lot of people have heard of in the States, which directly inspired this one. But now there are all sorts of races very much in the image of the Transcontinental. So it really kicked off a boom in self-supported ultra racing. Um, so yes, it was when I did it, it was around 4,000 kilometers across Europe. It's self-routed. You've got to plan your own route, and they give you four checkpoints that you've got to hit, which are not in a straight line, annoyingly, and they would put them in inconvenient places. So you can pick the fastest, flattest route, but then, for example, the first year I did it, checkpoint one was at the top of Mont Ventoux. So
Oh,
you still have to go up the mountain. And it was quite often that you'd find, checkpoints at two ends of the Alps. So you've got to ride right through the Alps over all the mountains to get between them. Um, so that was fun. So yeah, you plan your own route. You are completely self-supported. You're not allowed to have any outside assistance. So, you leave with your kit on your bike and a bit of food, and then you stop in supermarkets as you go. You might book a hotel or something, or you might just sleep in a field like I mostly did. Um, and what, what started out, I think, as just a minor security measure in the beginning, all the riders carry trackers. And I don't think they realized when they set this race up what that was going to mean to people because you could see where the riders were fine.
Yeah.
You could see if anyone had stopped for a long time. You could see if anyone had gone massively off any plausible course. But then people at home started getting really obsessed with watching all the dots on the map. And when I was doing this race, people would say, yeah, I lost 2 weeks. I just had you permanently in a window on my desktop. And it was random people as well. It was like my sister's ex-housemate got obsessed and my agent's boyfriend. And yeah, people were watching because it updates every few minutes. So you can see all these dots moving across the map and you can see the different routes people are taking. So you can speculate and think, right, well, those two dots, they were going along pretty much together, but now that one's gone north and that one's gone south. And then you zoom in and you think, okay, well, that one's taking the direct route through the mountains and that one's taking a more circuitous route, but there are fewer mountains, so she might actually draw ahead. This is really interesting. And you think, oh, that dot stopped for quite a while. And then you zoom in and you think, oh, yeah, yeah, he's in a hotel. Or, oh, no, she's in McDonald's. And I did have a moment in my first race, many moments, but I was sitting in McDonald's in I forget where it was, some town in Italy, and got an email from a friend saying, "Oh, having a McFlurry, are you?"
Brilliant.
It's funny doing the race because it's a very private experience. You're on your own. You're not in a pack. You're not in a
Mm.
peloton. You
Yeah.
do see other riders sometimes, but actually most of the time you don't. You're on your own in these foreign countries doing your thing. But you're being watched from the sky by thousands of people. And you forget. And then every now and then you'll get a text from your dad saying, you're doing well on that climb. And you're like, oh God, yeah. Hi.
That's quite a unique experience, and I am a self-confessed dot watcher as well. And I think what I enjoy about it is that although you can't see images of people obviously live on the road, that'll be weird. But I think you're living vicariously through that person. They are somewhere in Eastern Europe or wherever, and you're maybe sat at your desk plugging away. And I think there is that connection or that kind of deeper sense of, oh, I really wish I could do what she was doing. Absolutely brilliant experience. And in terms of the transcontinental, so the second one that you did, was that the one that you won overall?
I did not win overall. I was the first woman.
First woman.
There was
Congratulations.
a few years later, there was a woman called Fiona Colbinger who did win overall, and that was astounding. I came in quite a long way behind the first man, like a matter of days, because he was a machine, and I was someone who liked to stop and drink coffee quite a lot.
I think that's always a good idea. In terms of, obviously, we heard at the beginning of the podcast what you're doing now, and how cycling has become your way of life and you're living in different aspects. And obviously, we heard about when your first book was published, and congratulations on fulfilling that childhood dream. That must have been amazing. When did it get to the point in your life where cycling, well, obviously with couriering, it was your living, but I guess it's a bit more than that now, isn't it? In terms of this is what you do, this is what you talk about, write about, etc. Was there a moment in time when you realized that you could do this and this would kind of be the rest of your life?
I still haven't got to that moment. I still think it's going to eventually fall apart at some
Yeah.
point. Um, but I think maybe a year or so after the book was published, or even around the time the book was published, because I got lots of other writing work around the book coming out, and I don't know, yeah, a few years after that, I started to get money from sponsorship. And I don't know, it just all gradually came together. But I always have felt like I'm sort of cobbling together a living from all these little different bits and pieces of work. And every now and then a good project comes in. I think, phew, okay, that's another couple of months. I don't have to get a real job. Um, but it's always felt quite provisional. And I've always thought, well, I'm just, I'm muddling through. And at some point, I'm going to stop getting work and stop managing to cobble together a living from bits and pieces, and I'll have to go and get a real job. And then in recent years, I've noticed myself saying that and thought, well, you've been doing this for quite a long time, so maybe you need to think about it in terms of you've gathered momentum, and that's why the work keeps coming in. And indeed, perhaps if you went out and looked for some, you could have even more, and perhaps this could be a career. So it's happened to me quite unexpectedly. And I think, well, I told you at the beginning about my repeated failure to find a real job during various early periods of my life. And I honestly think that has scared me off because to spend months and months applying for jobs
Yeah.
and not get any. Sometimes I almost got one, but I never got to the final selection. And you think, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong and I don't even know what it is. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm just not cut out to have a job. But I hate the thought of applying for a job now.
Mm.
If I ever had to get a job, I'd be really stressed out about applying. And I just don't think I would based on those experiences. So yeah, maybe that's the thing I'm scared of that I need to go and do next. That would be a turn up for the books, wouldn't it? Change your life, people. Go and get a job.
Go and get a real job in inverted commas. I think we can all appreciate that. I don't know. There's something that comes with talking about a real job that kind of, for me, it kind of fills me with dread in terms of like, oh God, get a real job. It just sounds deflating. It doesn't sound like you're following your dreams or your passions or your interests. So long may what you're doing continue, hopefully for the rest of your life. And I'm sure it's going to chop and change like life does. We turn a different chapter in a book, don't we? And I think in terms of, kind of starting to wrap up a bit, what what are your thoughts about what's next for you then in terms of maybe adventures, more cycling challenges or different different work projects that you're doing? What's next for you?
Um, I've got loads of ideas at the moment. I've got far too many ideas, basically. So I'll run you through a few of them. Every year, at the start of the year, I start thinking about what my plans are for the year. And I have, like 18 things on the list. And then I get a few months in and think, I'm not even going to get three of these things done. So most of these will end up falling by the wayside. Um, I want to write another book. I've got a few different book ideas, none of which are imminent, so don't get excited, but I'm working on various things. And next year is the 20th anniversary of me getting into cycling. And I'm not going to mark that in any particular way, but what I've decided to do is just spend the year revisiting various rides over the last 2 decades that I have really enjoyed. In some cases, I'm going to literally do the ride again, and in other cases, I'm going to do a different sort of ride that visits a few of the places or intersects with it or something like that. Um, so one ride I really enjoyed back in 2014, my brother and I rode our fixies up from London to the start of the Tour de France when it started in Leeds, and that was exciting. So rather than do that again, I'm going to go and ride, hopefully, the three first stages that were in the
Oh,
UK.
cool.
That'll They look like nice routes, lots of good hills. So I'll do lots of stuff like that. And I think in general terms, one of the ways my cycling has gone and I've talked about this with a lot of people who've done the same sorts of adventures I have. There's often a movement when someone has done a few big, around the world or something like that. I'm not the only one. You get home and you start thinking, well, I've seen so much and I've traveled so much of the world. I feel like I barely know my home country now.
Sure.
And I've started getting really obsessed with filling in all the gaps. Um, I used to do great big rides across continents, and I will again. But now I like revisiting places and going back and seeing them again and again and again and learning what's around all the corners and learning all the stories of everything and learning what it looks like in different seasons and on different days. And I live in South Yorkshire at the moment, moved to Sheffield a couple of years ago. And one of the things I have loved here is getting to know the few miles around my home in great detail. I really love that as I'm sitting here at my desk, I can look out and I can see a hill over there. And I know exactly what it's like at the top of that hill because I've been there a lot. There's an old Iron Age hill fort there. There's some really steep climbs. There's a view of IKEA and lots of interesting paths. And it's none of it is like big ticket headline stuff.
Yeah,
It's not the kind of stuff people are going to want to watch a film about or read a book about. It's not cycling around the world. It's not winning a race. It's not breaking a record. But I find it all so interesting. And I find exploring the nooks and crannies and the little back roads of the UK so interesting. And I find getting to know France and Germany so interesting. I do want to travel to much more far-flung places again. But at the moment, I'm genuinely finding it a very enriching experience just getting to know the world immediately around me in great detail.
Brilliant. And what I'm hearing is kind of a bit of a slower pace in terms of, whereas you've done races before, I guess, cycling around your local area, there's a bit more time to just kind of pause and enjoy it rather than just the scenery rushing by. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have struggled with that, I admit,
Mm,
because for so many years I was going as far as I could and then as fast as I could. And yes, people would say, "Oh, slow down, smell the flowers and enjoy the moment." And I think, yeah, 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 that's all right for you. But for me, it's very important to be going as far and as fast as I can. And now I'm saying, "Oh, I slow down and I smell the flowers." And I think, "Oh, listen to yourself." Oh, middle-aged. Oh, but I am a middle-aged woman. And I've had long COVID for the last few years, and I think I'm better now.
mm,
Cautiously, I'm feeling better. I think I am closer to normal than I have been for a while. But as part of that, I've had to find ways of enjoying cycling and, finding it enriching and being obsessed with it that are not based around going far and going fast because they're not available. And
yeah,
so my choices were, well, you can not cycle at all, or you can find a different way of doing it because, you know, that's what you're going to have to do. So
sure.
I've now, I think, created this narrative for myself that is, you know, look at this wonderful way I have of exploring the world around me and, learning endlessly about the history and the geography and the biology and whatever else is available.
And I've seen, I think, on Instagram about some of the, what should I call them, workshops, doing courses for women specifically. I assume it's women. I can't remember if it's mixed, but coaching women's groups as well. Is that part of your repertoire now?
I've done a little bit of that.
Mm,
I'm not myself a coach,
mm,
but I've done some work with people like Sisters in the Wild, who are a wonderful organization, and I cannot shout about them enough. And we did a LGBTQ intro to bikepacking weekend a little while ago, which people seem to love, and I loved. It was really fun. So we're hoping to do one or two of those again. But honestly, I don't think I am the important one here because in the last 5 years since lockdown happened, so many women have come into cycling and they've come in often as more or less a beginner and said, okay, well, I don't know what I'm doing. And there's a whole bunch of us here who don't really know what we're doing, but we're going to get together and figure it out. And they've fundraised to train each other as ride leaders, they've trained as mechanics, and they're now running all these amazing groups where they're getting people into cycling and helping women and all others to feel more confident and to push their boundaries and to learn all the things that I had to do on my own.
yeah.
I have, I mean, I don't really have anything to do with all of that happening. I just gratefully receive their wisdom and sometimes go on their rides and think, why did I not manage to put together something like that? But it's amazing and it's really, I think, changed the cycling world for the better, just undeniably. There are so many more women around. They're enjoying themselves. They've found ways of doing it that suit them. They're happy, they're confident, they're extremely capable, and they're bringing other people in. It's wonderful to see.
I've been on some of those organized rides as well, and they're so empowering. And like you said, women from all walks of life, different abilities, different bikes, different knowledge, and it's great to share stories and go out there together. Just to wrap up, Emily, for anyone listening who may be in a similar position to what you were back in London, maybe struggling to find a job or has an idea to do something that they think they might not be capable of going and doing, what words of advice would you give to them if they're thinking of pivoting or changing in some way? What would you say?
I think I've got a couple of things. And one thing I wanted to say earlier when we were talking about, quitting your job and following your dreams, I'm quite suspicious of that narrative in particular because I mean some jobs are terrible and you should definitely quit them. And if your job's making you miserable, that's no good. But having a job can be a really great way of keeping your life together. Like when I came back from my ride across Asia and I was lost and miserable, working 5 days a week as a cycle courier is what held me together. And having that routine, having that thing that got me out of the house, it was physical, I met people, it was a really good structure for my life. And if I hadn't had that, I think I would have been in a really bad way. And I've spoken to other people who've said the same thing. So it's not necessarily about quitting your job. It might be about finding the job that suits you.
Yeah.
Um, but also quit your job.
Yeah, do it.
It's
Life's too short.
yeah, I mean I'm trying to think of how to encapsulate this in a piece of advice, but I am so glad that events conspired to mean that I actually did get to have a go at being a cycle courier, because that was what set me off.
Yeah.
And that was what set me up, as well as helping me feel confident enough to go and cycle around the world. It's what made me a writer. I started a blog when I was a courier, and that was the first time I'd written properly for myself. And that obviously that led to a book deal. It led to more writing, more books, a career as a writer. Um, if there's something that you're thinking of doing, and if you could do it, if your life, obviously, if you're in the thick of it, you've got a busy career, a young family, all sorts of stress, it might actually not be the moment to think,
Mm.
let's try that one thing. But if you haven't yet got that, or if you've come out the end of it, or, if you have space in your life to try the thing that you secretly dream of, that you've always wanted to do, that you think, what if about, you should try it. Because imagine if you got to 89 and looked back and thought, you know what, I probably could have done that. And I think another thing, maybe, remember what I was saying about giving up on my PhD plans? And it was a thought experiment. It was just like, what if I just give up? Let's just see what happens. You
Mm.
can always change your mind. You could say, okay, let's quit my job and try this other thing for 1 year. Let's start this course that I could do for maybe a few months. And I can always just give up and go back if I decide that I was better off before. Nothing is permanent.
Very wise words and a really good place to bring the podcast to an end, I think. But before we do that, Emily, where can people find out more about you, follow your next adventures, etc.?
So I have two online presences. I'm on Instagram as at Emily of Chapel, um, and I post there fairly often. And I think my main thing these days is I write a Substack newsletter which goes out once a week on a Monday, and that's called Unfinished Journeys. But you can find it by Googling Emily Chappell Substack. That's normally the first thing that comes up.
Super. I'll pop those links in the show notes. And all it remains for me to say is thank you so much for talking to us today. Really, really appreciated you taking the time. Can't wait to see what your next adventures are and also the next book. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Living Life Differently podcast. And what another great insight into the life of a woman whose path was already really set out, in her mind at least anyway. Somebody who had their dreams and their sights set on a career and a pathway through academia, having done an undergraduate degree, a master's degree, and hopefully going on to a PhD, but that wasn't to be. And then, by a chance decision to go and be a bicycle courier because she was struggling to find a job doing anything else. And look what that led to. Just that one decision then led to a chain of events, which led to her doing a cycle around the world and also some amazing ultra distance events. And not only that, fulfilling her childhood dream of becoming an author as well. And I can highly vouch for the books that she's written. They're written in such a great way with loads of detail, and the passion for cycling really, really shines through. So, yeah, huge thanks to Emily for sharing her story, and I really hope that you get some inspiration from the decisions that she's made, the lifestyle that she now leads. She's followed her passion, and it's turned out absolutely amazing. And as ever, I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Feel free to message me or tag me on social media. You'll find me on Instagram and TikTok at Living Life Differently and on Facebook at Living Life Differently Podcast. I also popped some content on my YouTube channel, so if you wanted to watch this episode, you can do that as well. So all I have to say next is thank you so much for listening. See you on the next episode. Until then, stay bold, stay brave, and keep living life differently.